Welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Anna Kurian and I teach in the Department of English at the University of Hyderabad. Today we are going to be looking at the second paper in English literature from 1590 to 1798. And we are looking at the unit devoted to Renaissance dramatists other than Shakespeare. The dramatist we are studying today is Christopher Marlowe, and we shall be examining his text, Dr. Faustus, in some detail. Christopher Marlowe was born in Canterbury in 1564, and he can be considered the first major dramatist of the Elizabethan period if we leave out Sir Thomas Kidd. Now, Christopher Marlowe was actually of very humble birth. He was born of a shoemaker family, but he was finally educated at the University of Cambridge, and he went to King's School in Canterbury. Now, all of this education was made possible by several scholarships, and the fact that he had a university education helped him to move upwards in the world. So from being the son of a shoemaker, he eventually, of course, moved in circles of educated people, but also amidst royalty to a certain extent, because he was said to have been a spy for Queen Elizabeth. However, his education is also significant for other things, not just for his social mobility. Because he was educated in Latin and Greek, and because he had a university education, he was introduced to ways of thinking which were very different from what was popular amongst the ordinary people of England at that time. So he learnt about civilizations and cultures that were not necessarily English, as well as ways of governance, such as the Roman, which was a republic, and also about religions which did not include original sin and the concept of death upon the cross, and so on and so forth. So Marlowe's education then gave him a way of looking at the world which was very different from what was already available to the ordinary people of England. Marlowe is also celebrated for the innovations that he brought to writing itself, and in particular to dramatic blank verse. He is supposed to have perfected that way of writing, and this is seen across his dramas. In 1593, at a very young age, he was just 29, Marlowe went to a tavern and there he was stabbed to death. Later on, of course, there is a discussion as to whether he was a spy, and he was under investigation for spying. In addition, there are several other problems. He was also supposed to have been an atheist in an age when atheism was not permitted, and he was also supposed to have been homosexual, or even if not homosexual, interested in young boys. So all of these things then make him an outsider figure in a world which was seen as fairly uniform. We will now move on to a discussion of the major works of Marlowe, and then key ideas and themes in that as well. Marlowe's reputation today as a playwright rests on four major works: Tamburlaine the Great, which is in two parts, Dr. Faustus, The Tragedy of the Rich Jew of Malta, and Edward II. In addition to these four, he is also said to have written Dido, Queen of Carthage, as well as The Massacre at Paris. But those are minor and disputed, or may be written in collaboration with others, whereas these four are attributed to him and to him alone. The fact that his reputation in certain circles equals or nearly equals that of William Shakespeare is significant, because what we are seeing then is that before the age of 29, he had written four great plays which are valued the world over, and he was dead, whereas Shakespeare, of course, lived to a ripe old age, and so on and so forth, in the course of which he wrote 38 plays. So these four plays, which make up the reputation of Christopher Marlowe, can be read together, and it can be seen that there are certain themes that occur and recur across these four plays. One of the first major themes that recurs across them is the use and abuse of power. First of all, of course, Marlowe examines power itself and various versions of that power. So if in Edward II, he looks at monarchic power and how monarchic power has to be subdued to the needs of a community, then in the Jew of Malta, he examines commercial power, or how does money buy you power. In Dr. Faustus, of course, he is talking about the power of knowledge, and in Tamburlaine the Great, he shows us how an individual from a low birth can come to power, and then, of course, how he abuses that power. So in one sense also, all of these plays are to do with social mobility. Now, Tamburlaine is about somebody who is unapologetically arrogant, he is ambitious, and he is powerful. He, of course, has many dramatic speeches, and through the play, Marlowe examines what it means to have power when you grew up without. Also, of course, the fact that he is lame, so somebody who has a physical problem, who then ascends to such great power, is examined through this play. In The Jew of Malta, what we have is a very interesting play where you have a Jew, an outsider to society, who delights in the power that his wealth fetches him, but also delights in the power that he gets because of his evil. His main occupation is to go around doing evil deeds so that people suffer, and he revels in that sense of power that he gains from watching their suffering. Dr. Faustus, as is well known, and as the rest of this lesson elaborates, is about the desire to control all power, and if necessary via demonic or satanic power. So it is also about the transaction of the human with demons or with the devil to gain power on earth here below. And there is then, of course, Edward II, which again provides us with a saddening, tragic picture of a king who, in his pursuit of his personal desires, then has a problem with the kingly power that he exercises, and in the end suffers and dies because he is unable to give up his personal desires in the pursuit of his kingly goals. Marlowe's characters then therefore show us how the subject of power is integral to the reading of each of these plays, but it also shows us how individual ambition then negotiates with the structures of the world, but also with the taboos associated with this conflict between personal desire and social or state goals. Social mobility also is something that is integral to to Marlowe's characters, and we see this because also Marlowe himself is an instance of social mobility, as is evidenced by the fact that the son of a shoemaker then goes on to become a great playwright, but also a spy in the English court, and so on and so forth. Now, he himself also then speaks of taboos, discrimination, and how it is possible to be ruined personally and socially because of this social mobility. The other theme that has garnered great attention in Marlowe's work is the theme of predestination, or the fact that humans, in spite of social mobility, in spite of their attempts to move within society, eventually lack all agency in determining the course of one's life. So even as Marlowe seems to show us that it is possible to do so, at the end of the play we are then told that actually the structures of society will shut you down and eventually you will die in a position of some ruin, as opposed to the upward mobility that might initially have been showcased. This theme is important because it works as a commentary on social mobility in Renaissance England as well. Now, Renaissance England is a society which is in some upheaval, and wherein people were seen to be able to make their fortunes or make their way in life, not because of their birth, but because of either the education that they gained or because of status that accrued to them because of the work that they did. Now, even as Marlowe shows us that this can happen, he also shows us that the world is not so generous as to allow it to happen in peace, and that structures such as either religion or the government at the center will eventually put a stop to this kind of upward mobility. We see this in The Jew of Malta, where a Jew is then given a hard time. Though of course he himself is evil, eventually he is killed because of his Jewish faith. So religion, as one of those central structures which govern people's lives and which make them adhere to one set of norms, is something that Marlowe plays around with. This is also of course seen in Dr. Faustus, where Dr. Faustus is a doctor of divinity and is then made to fit into a framework which he wishes to escape from. He does escape from it temporarily, but eventually he is made to fit into that framework, and he's made to die because he refuses to fit into it. So Marlowe also then demonstrates to us how belonging to one faith determines the extent to which you can be seen as a safe and loyal member of a country, wherein it was important to publicly perform loyalty to the monarch over and over again. It is also important to look at the fact that in Marlowe, what we see is that even though there is free will and agency, that free will and agency is limited, because eventually if you defy monarchic rules, doctrines, norms, then free will and agency stops coming into play, and instead what comes into play is the role of governance within the society, which will then eventually lead to your death. So what we can see is that certain key themes recur in Marlowe's plays, and these were themes which would also have been faced by individuals in the England that Marlowe lived in. And this battle between individual interests and beliefs and social and monarchic mandates is something that recurs across all the four main plays of Christopher Marlowe that we are here looking at. Also, there is the problem that Marlowe, even as he seems to tell us that hard work or education or knowledge can help us to move forward, also shows us the belief that is at the center of Renaissance Christian society during this period, that it is not the individual's work that earns him salvation, but rather the fact that it is a gift from God. So therefore, over and over again, we are told that good work, or the work that we do during our lifetime, will not save us or will not damn us. Instead, that is something that has been determined before our birth itself. Now, of course, let us briefly summarize Dr. Faustus. Dr. Faustus tells us a story of a Renaissance scholar, namely Dr. Faustus himself, who is at the forefront of knowledge. In fact, Dr. Faustus begins with a chorus which tells us that he is somebody who has achieved learning in practically all spheres, and yet he is like Icarus. Icarus, who is from classical mythology and who mounts up on waxen wings, and then because the sun melts the wax, he falls down. And this is, of course, what Faustus is also supposed to stand for. Faustus, who creates by his own work, his own ambitions, he creates the possibility that he can rise up. And yet, because he rises up against the rules and the norms of society, he will, of course, eventually fall. And that will be a great fall indeed. We are also told that this desire for knowledge that Faustus epitomizes is something that he has worked hard for, that knowledge, and it is in various realms. So he is a doctor of medicine, he is a doctor of divinity, he's also a doctor of law, and all of these he has excelled in. And yet he decides that all of these are not really satisfactory, and instead he will then give himself over to necromancy and magic, and in doing so then he will gain extra honor, extra power, and of course he will become all powerful. So Faustus then, once he has taken the decision that he will become a student of necromancy, is helped in this ambition by other scholars such as Valdis, and then together they conjure up Mephistopheles. Now this is, of course, the entry of the demon into the study of Dr. Faustus, and through Mephistopheles, Dr. Faustus makes a pact with Lucifer that he will have 24 years of pleasure and knowledge and power on earth, and at the end of 24 years he will then, of course, give up his soul to Lucifer. And it is this gaining of the soul of Dr. Faustus that Lucifer is interested in. Now the rest of the play then traces what he does in 24 years, and what we see is that he has brief episodes wherein he tries to achieve some learning. So he travels across, he does some interplanetary travel, he goes across and sees the sun, the moon, and all the stars. He asks questions of Mephistopheles, which Mephistopheles sometimes answers, sometimes does not. But most of the time he spends it in luxurious living and in very petty ambitions. So he plays games with the Pope, he plays tricks upon the Pope, he does conjuring tricks for the nobility. For a duchess, he brings grapes which are out of season. He goes to Rome and then pesters the Pope. He does a few small funny tricks, but nothing which is seriously significant. I mean, to have given away one's soul to play tricks upon the Pope or to entertain the emperor does not seem to be an equitable bargain. Instead, he also, of course, watches masks which are performed by devils, and eventually he has a brief affair or a relationship, a one-night stand, so to speak, with Helen of Troy, the most beautiful woman in the world. Now, this is as much as what he achieves. Given the fact that the pact is for learning and knowledge in exchange for his soul, what we see is that Faustus begins with the desire for learning and knowledge, but ends up with having made an exchange wherein he only gains brief, petty pleasure and eventually loses his soul. And as the 24 years draw to a close, Faustus is no longer able to believe that he has done something great. Instead, he worries. He feels a great anxiety about the damnation that is about to come upon him. He, of course, at that point is then given the choice by the good angel and the bad angel, by an old man, that he can still repent. But Faustus descends into despair, believes that he cannot repent, and the play ends as it began in Faustus's study. And now what we see is that the Faustus, who in the beginning was ambitious, confident, in fact overconfident, arrogant, and full of certainties, is now somebody who is alone, despairing, and extremely scared, only wishing to escape the death that waits for him. The other major contrast that is set up is that in the beginning, Faustus is somebody who is full of companionship. He has various scholars who come to meet him, everybody hangs out around him, and yet at the end he is this person who's completely alone. There is only an old man who comes to meet him and who offers him good advice. By then his only companionship is to be derived from the devils with whom he has been associating through the 24 years. The epilogue with which the play ends gives us a brief summary of his career and shows us that something that could have grown full straight has then, of course, been thwarted, has been warped out of shape, and instead he descends into the damnation that the devils have awaiting for him. The significance of Faustus comes to us from supposedly a real life figure who lived in Germany in the 1400s and who was supposed to have sold his soul to the devil for knowledge. And this person died, and there were several legends which attached themselves to him, legends of witchcraft and magic, and the fact that he sold his soul and eventually, of course, lost his life. All of this was put forward in the form of a biography, and it was published in 1587. In England, it comes to the English persons in 1592 as the history of the damnable life and deserved death of Dr. Johann Faustus. It was translated by somebody called P.F. Gent in 1592, and this is the text on which Christopher Marlowe's Dr. Faustus is said to have been based, because many of the things that we find in Marlowe's play are seen in this text as well. Christopher Marlowe's text also draws upon English society of this time, which had a few key figures such as Dr. Faustus, people who were both valuable, who are knowledgeable, but who were also dangerous. One key person such as this is Sir Walter Raleigh, who was supposed to have achieved great perfection in knowledge and learning, and yet was also said to dabble in witchcraft and devil worship. So this association of extreme learning with witchcraft and necromancy is something that was a popular trope in Elizabethan times, and in an age when discoveries about the universe, about the planets, and about the ways in which learning itself was changing, that learning was changing from something that was given to people in books to something that was more of an experiential mode. Dr. Faustus is situated at that juncture. Dr. Faustus also poses editorial problems because there were two texts that were there of Dr. Faustus, the play, as it was performed by Christopher Marlowe, as it was written by Christopher Marlowe and performed in the 1590s. One is the A text, which appeared in 1604, and the second is a B text, which was published in 1616. This lesson uses as its text the New Mermaid edition of Dr. Faustus, which is the B1 text, which was published in 1616. A discussion of learning and of education is central to any reading of Dr. Faustus, because it can be also read as a meditation on the education of the time and how education and learning were viewed by ordinary people during this period as well. Now, the Renaissance, of course, is the period which inaugurates the questioning, skeptical Renaissance mind, and Faustus epitomizes that. But the play, as we read it, also demonstrates to us that even as you can question, as you can be skeptical, there are also limits to how much you can question and how far you can go in your pursuit of learning. So when we first meet Dr. Faustus surrounded by various scholars, these are scholars who represent then to us what is permissible, what is acceptable, and what is seen as good in the realms of learning. Dr. Faustus, of course, transcends this because then he decides that he will try out necromancy, he will then explore magic, and his transactions with the devil, with Mephistopheles and with Lucifer, then transcend and move away from his institutional affiliation with the schools of learning that are permissible and acceptable. He, of course, remains a scholar through the 24 years of his life which he has given to which he has gained because of his pact with Lucifer. But through those 24 years, even though he remains a scholar, what we see is that he indulges far less in scholarly pursuits and indulges far more in random, completely petty acts of trickery, humor, and also just random joking, which does not in any way advance his standing as a scholar. So what we see is that initially he begins with the University of Wittenberg, which is where the play is set. The first scene is set. His study is in the University of Wittenberg. He moves out from those institutionally sanctioned spaces and then goes into areas where there is a forbidding of the pursuit of learning itself, which is within the state and within religious authority. So when he has his transactions or his games which he plays with the Pope and with the Emperor, we are looking at how learning escapes from sanctioned spaces into non-sanctioned spaces. But what we also see is that even as Faustus decides that he is superior to Mephistopheles and that he is superior also to all other demons, he wishes to control them. And here then we are looking at the hierarchies that exist within knowledge. In fact, the play also shows us those hierarchies because you have an entire subplot which is to do with the servants and with Faustus's servant Wagner, and then there is Dick, and then all of them are also interested in advancing themselves by working at conjuring and learning to call up the devil. Now, we also see another hierarchy which is put in place because Mephistopheles is both servant to Faustus, but he is also bound to Lucifer. So, he is servant as well as master to Faustus, and he is utterly servant to Lucifer. So all the time we are also being told that there are certain hierarchies which are in place, and those hierarchies cannot be escaped from. And the parody of the clown and Wagner, and which is seen in the tricks that they play, are also then scenes which demonstrate to us this hierarchy which is in place. The learning that he gains and which he believes will result in damnation and eternal slavery to Lucifer is how Marlowe exposes the flaw in this absolute straight arrangement which otherwise can be seen between education and social advantage. So education up to a point is seen as sanctioned, education up to a point is seen as good. But if people transgress those boundaries, then of course everything falls apart. And which is why in the end, when Faustus is awaiting damnation and he is scared and he is despairing, he says he will burn all his books. But at that point then, what he discovers is that even by burning all his books, he cannot then be guaranteed life or even salvation at that point in time. This leads us to the next major theme within the play, and this is of course the theme of salvation, damnation, and the corporeality of all punishment. Now, even as salvation and damnation is central to the reading of Dr. Faustus, he gives up his eternal soul to Lucifer, he sells his soul, knowing in advance that if he does so, he will be damned for all eternity. He sells it for 24 years of pleasure and of knowledge. And what we see is that all of this is linked to the human body as well. So even as knowledge seems to help the human to transcend human limitations, what we see is that that knowledge is also vested in the human body, and it is in the human body that one suffers and one dies. And this is seen right from the beginning because we are told that there is an experiential form of knowledge which is initially given to us via Mephistopheles and via Faustus himself. Faustus learns by experiencing what he needs to learn. And this we see when he travels. Mephistopheles takes him to see the heavens and hell itself, when he travels across the planets, across the globe, and it is about experience. And yet we are told about another range of experiences. Mephistopheles, when asked by Faustus about how terrible is hell, comes back with the answer that he had tasted the eternal joys of heaven and seen the face of God. So experience is essential both to knowing salvation as well as to knowing damnation. And when Faustus scoffs at the idea that there is damnation, Mephistopheles answers by saying, "Hey, think so still, till experience change thy mind." So experience is therefore then central to all knowledge. It is only by experiencing it in your human body that you can know it. And later on, what we see is that this critique of religion is shown in the petty gifts that Faustus receives from Mephistopheles in exchange for his soul. So he gives away his soul, and what he receives is experiences of small pleasures. He sees a pageant, he's able to fetch grapes for a duchess, he's able to play tricks upon a pope, and he's able to please several people. But these are all things that he experiences in his human body, and the final experience is, of course, when he meets Helen of Troy and the famous speech wherein he speaks about the face that launched 1,000 ships and burnt the topless towers of Ilium. Now, all of that is all very well, but at the end of it, there is the end of mortal life, and that end is vested in pain. As when we see that initially, when he has to sign away his body, he is told to cut his arm and draw his blood, and his blood congeals. We are introduced to the theme of corporeality, or the necessity for the human body in this first instance when he is about to sign away his soul. Later on, what we see is that even as he fears damnation, it is in his body that he fears it. So when we over and over again, what we realize is the soul is set up in opposition to the body, and yet eventually at the end of the play, what we see is that the soul and the body are both required for human life, and Faustus is about to lose both, which is why we are told that the devils will come to fetch away his soul. And yet the last scene of the play tells us that his body has been torn asunder, and it's scattered in bits upon the stage when the play ends. So it is as a spirit that he enjoys superhuman privileges, but it is as a man with a body of flesh and blood that feels pain that he suffers death. So Faustus Marlowe's play then brings together both the human body as well as the eternal spirit, and shows us that neither of them can survive a Faustian bargain such as the one which we see here. Faustian bargains are, of course, part of popular culture, and several works of literature have built upon this. One of the most famous is, of course, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which shows us about the consequences of attempting to be more than human, or trying to reach above human abilities and trying to create something along the lines of what Faustus himself did, that he wanted to be more than human in his learning and in his knowledge. Frankenstein does more or less the same kinds of thing. And what we see also is in the popular movies such as Bedazzled and The Devil's Advocate, which also give us the devil as an allegory for the vices of urban life: rapid social mobility, unscrupulous professional practices, decline in personal integrity, all of this for the service of the devil, and unquenchable personal ambition. So when we talk about a Faustian bargain, we are talking in shorthand about a deed which is done wherein we hope for quick advantages, and we are willing to sign away those things that actually matter far more than anything else. The poet Carol Ann Duffy has a take on Faustus, which is actually from the angle of Mrs. Faust, wherein we are given a feminist analysis of what happens to the Faustus story when we look at it through a gendered perspective. So in this lesson, we have looked at Christopher Marlowe as being one of the most prominent playwrights of the Renaissance England. We have also examined Dr. Faustus in some detail. Dr. Faustus is a text that rewards you constantly if you are to read it, and I would strongly recommend that you read it as well as read this lesson, which will give you ways of thinking about Dr. Faustus.